Hollywood weddings between 1910 and 1920 existed in a strange and fragile world where fame was new, privacy was still possible, and love often collided with ambition, morality, and studio power. Because this was the decade when Hollywood itself was still discovering what it meant to be Hollywood, a place where actors were not yet gods, where wedding ceremonies were small, quiet, and deeply personal, and where many marriages happened before the public even knew the names of the people involved. As silent film actors and actresses lived in a time when romance unfolded far from flashing cameras, and marriage was often seen as a private duty rather than a marketable event, so couples married in churches, backyards, modest homes, or quiet hotels, often without photographers or press, creating wedding stories that history barely recorded, and yet these unions shaped the emotional foundation of early Hollywood, because many stars entered marriage young, inexperienced and hopeful, believing love could coexist with a career that was still sudden defined. Still learning to control images, sometimes discouraged marriage altogether, fearing it would reduce fan fascination, especially for actresses who were expected to appear innocent, available, and morally pure, a pressure that quietly pushed many couples into secrecy, leading to rushed ceremonies and hidden spouses. And this secrecy became a defining feature of Hollywood weddings during this era, particularly as stars like Mary Pickford rose to fame while navigating love under public expectation. Her early marriage reflecting the tension between personal happiness and professional image, while Douglas Fairbanks embodied the romantic ideal of the adventurous leading man, later becoming part of one of Hollywood's most celebrated unions. And meanwhile, Charlie Chaplin's complicated relationships revealed how fame distorted intimacy, as age gaps, power imbalances, and scandal followed him even in the silent era, showing that Hollywood weddings were never just about love, but also about reputation, control, and survival. Especially for women who often married under pressure, sometimes to escape restrictive contracts or social judgment, and yet found themselves trapped in marriages that offered little freedom, as divorce during this period was stigmatized and dangerous to a career, forcing many couples to remain together unhappily or separate quietly without explanation, while World War I added another layer of urgency and fragility, pushing lovers to marry quickly before uncertainty and loss, giving some Hollywood weddings a bittersweet tone, as young actors married before leaving for service or supporting war efforts, knowing nothing about the future, and despite the lack of glamour compared to later decades, these weddings carried emotional weight, marked by simple dresses, modest rings, handwritten vows, and unpolished photographs that feel raw and human today, reminding us that early Hollywood stars were not yet distant icons, but ordinary people standing at the edge of an industry that would soon consume them. And as studios grew more powerful toward the end of the decade, marriages increasingly became tools for image management, sometimes encouraged to present stability, sometimes hidden to preserve fantasy, turning love into something negotiated behind closed doors. And this shift laid the groundwork for the controlled publicity weddings of later eras. Yet many of these early unions ended quietly, eroded by fame, temptation, and unequal power, leaving behind faded photos and forgotten names. But their legacy remains powerful, because they show a version of Hollywood before spectacle dominated intimacy, when weddings were not headlines, but turning points in lives shaped by hope, fear, ambition, and vulnerability, and when love existed in shadows rather than spotlights, making Hollywood weddings from 1910 to 1920 some of the most human, fragile, and emotionally complex unions in the history of cinema. Hollywood weddings in the 1910s were also shaped by a powerful tension between tradition and reinvention, because many actors who arrived in California carried old-world values from small towns, immigrant families, and strict religious backgrounds, yet found themselves suddenly living in a place that rewarded reinvention, temptation, and emotional risk. And this clash often played out most painfully inside marriages, where expectations of loyalty, obedience, and permanence collided with fame, long working hours, and sudden admiration from strangers, creating emotional distance that few couples were prepared to manage, especially at a time when marriage was considered a lifelong contract rather than a flexible choice. And for actresses in particular, marriage often meant the end of independence, as husbands, studios, and society expected them to prioritize home over career, leading many women to abandon promising roles or hide professional ambitions behind domestic respectability, while male actors were often forgiven for affairs, separations, or second marriages, revealing a deep gender imbalance that quietly destroyed many early Hollywood unions. And yet, despite these pressures, some couples genuinely believed marriage could humanize fame, using love as an anchor in an industry that moved too fast and demanded too much, resulting in weddings that were emotionally sincere even if historically invisible. With ceremonies attended by only a handful of friends, fellow actors, or studio employees, often followed not by honeymoons but by immediate returns to film sets, where brides still wore veils in the morning and costumes by afternoon. Highlighting how inseparable work and marriage became in early Hollywood life, and as the decade progressed, newspapers began cautiously reporting on actor marriages, not yet sensational but curious, presenting stars as respectable citizens to reassure a public still suspicious of the film industry, which had not yet earned cultural legitimacy, making weddings a moral tool to frame Hollywood as wholesome rather than corrupt, a strategy that slowly transformed private unions into public narratives, while behind the scenes many marriages were quietly unraveling, strained by jealousy, financial disputes, alcoholism, and the psychological impact of sudden fame, problems that had no language or support system at the time, leaving couples isolated and confused. And by the end of the 1910s, the contrast between romantic illusion and personal reality became impossible to ignore. As divorce cases increased, scandals emerged, and studios began tightening control over personal lives, setting the stage for the rigid star system of the 1920s, where love would be scripted as carefully as films. Yet the weddings of 1910 to 1920 remain uniquely powerful because they occurred before the myth fully hardened, before glamour replaced vulnerability, and before Hollywood learned how to sell love as entertainment, leaving behind marriages that feel unfinished, unresolved, and deeply human, echoing the uncertainty of an industry still learning how to survive, and reminding us that beneath the legend of Hollywood lies a forgotten decade where love was real, fragile, and often lost to history.